One of the key difficulties we moderns have in understanding the religious framework of the ancient Romans is that though their religious practices were wrapped up in many of the same hopes, fears, and expectations that inform modern belief, there was no central authoritative text that we can refer to solve critical questions of doctrine or theology. Monotheistic creeds all center around divinely inspired texts practitioners and non-believers alike can utilize to understand the faith and the divine commands associated with it. For though debate will still exist within these communities, shared adherence to a central core set of tenets provides alignment on the fundamentals and prevents too much drift from occurring. It is little wonder, then, that books like the Torah, the Bible, and the Quran are so important in their respective creeds, and adherents are encouraged to familiarize themselves with the texts to deepen their understanding of the faith. But the pagan world of the ancient Mediterranean lacked the cohesion that we associate with modern monotheistic religions. It was just as totalizing in its claims, and as comprehensive in its responses to the basic questions of existence posed by believers, but it lacked the unitary character and moral imperatives we associate with religion today. This immense gulf, then, explains a great deal about how Romans approached religion from an entirely unique vantage point, and sought to apply it to public life differently. For the Romans did actually possess a book that they believed was divinely inspired. However, their attitudes to this text are so fundamentally at odds with how we moderns approach sacred literature that it serves as an effective, albeit limited, Rosetta Stone for those seeking to better understand the mental landscape of Roman religious belief and practice. These divinely inspired works were the Sibylline Books, and they were filled with cryptic Greek poetic verses that were said to originate with a prophetess from the Greek colony of Cumae. An old woman, a perfect stranger, came to King Tarquin the Proud, bringing 9 books. She declared that they were oracles of the gods, and that she wished to sell them. Tarquin inquired the price. The woman demanded an immense and exorbitant sum. The king laughed her to scorn, believing her to be in her dotage. Then she placed a lighted brazier before him, burned 3 of the books to ashes, and asked whether he would buy the remaining 6 at the same price. But at this, Tarquin laughed all the more, and said that there was now no doubt that the old woman was crazy. Upon that, the woman at once burned up 3 more books, and again calmly made the same request, that he would buy the remaining 3 at the original figure. Tarquin now became serious and more thoughtful, and realizing that such persistence and confidence were not to be treated lightly, he bought the 3 books that were left at as high a price as had been asked for all 9. Now it is a fact that after then leaving Tarquin, that woman was never seen again, anywhere. The 3 books were deposited in a shrine. Believed to be inspired by Apollo, the Sibylline Books became a cornerstone of Roman religious practice, though, unlike modern holy books, there was no desire to share them with the masses. Initially, the books were kept in a chest in the temple of Jupiter Capitolinus, where they were watched over by 2 men who could only consult the books upon orders from the Senate. The power and prestige of these books was so great that even those to whom they were entrusted were not to read them for pleasure or to deepen their own theological understanding. Rather, the books were only read at times of crisis, or when confusion prompted a greater need for certainty regarding the divine will. The Sibylline Books had such authority that it was critical their interpretation be left only to religious experts within the aristocracy who could be relied on to come to the desired conclusions. The public was not allowed to access the books, and any interpreter who divulged their contents was put to death. Tarquinius the king caused Marcus Tullius the duumvir to be sewed in a sack after the ancient manner, and to be thrown into the sea, because he had for a bribe delivered to Petronius Sabinus a certain book containing the mysteries of the civic sacred rituals committed to his keeping, most justly, seeing that violation of trust deserves the same punishment among men as from the gods. Unsurprisingly, then, we no longer possess the text today. More on this later, but given the manner in which they are referenced in our sources, the Sibylline Books appear to have offered not a unified narrative or moral commands, but rather a series of remedial instructions, always hidden under a layer of prophetic ambiguity, on how Rome could avert divine displeasure and restore order to its relationship with the gods, after a breach occurred in the Pax Deorum, Rome's agreement to properly respect the gods and reap their blessings in return. These were not works of prophecy that could be used to understand the future, but rather instructions on how to correct errors made in the past by honoring gods Rome had neglected. But since the books were written in Greek and likely had an origin in the Greek colonies of Italy, the advice that was gleaned from them was always Greek in character. The text then provided the impetus for religious reform and the introduction of Greek deities and religious practices into the Roman religious framework. Interpretation of the Sibylline Books was thus the rationale that could be relied on for religious innovation within the remarkably conservative Roman religious outlook. Because Romans were so reluctant to alter any established religious tradition, they could only accept the foreign religious practices that the city's increasingly diverse population demanded if the reforms were themselves rooted in ancient authority. Alongside the ritual of evocatio, by which gods of conquered territories were adopted by the Romans, the Sibylline Books provided a crucial pretext for Roman religion to evolve and expand beyond the cults of the Tiber into a religious worldview that was more reflective of the Republic's growing claim on the Mediterranean during the 2nd and 3rd centuries BCE, but still maintain that the sacred traditions key to Roman identity were unaltered.
If you're enjoying this video, please do us a favor by liking, commenting, and subscribing. We're a small channel, and this is the only way to get the almighty YouTube algorithm to notice us. Furthermore, you can help Tribunate become more sustainable by becoming a member for as little as 99 cents a month. Thank you for all of your support.
The use of the books in times of crisis to expand the Roman pantheon is attested in Livy's recounting of how the decision was made in 293 for the Romans to begin worshipping Asclepius, the Greek god of healing and medicine. One calamity, a pestilence which raged in the city and country districts alike, the mischief it did was looked upon as a portent. The sacred books were consulted to see what end or what remedy would be vouchsafed by the gods. It was ascertained that Asclepius must be sent for from Epidaurus. But the recommendations were not always so innocuous. During times when Rome was under foreign military threat, such as Hannibal during the Second Punic War, or the northern tribes that were eventually defeated by Marius, it was determined that the Sibylline Books called for Rome to practice human sacrifice by burying alive 2 Gauls and 2 Greeks in the Forum Boarium. Despite the deep-seated Roman aversion to human sacrifice, these grisly rituals were honored, and the unfortunate victims met horrifying ends to placate the unseen, angry gods. Their ability to prompt Romans to act in ways that ran counter to their core cultural values hints at the great power these books held over society, and the vast authority invested in them offers some insight into why the texts were so closely guarded by the aristocrats. Only those with established aristocratic convictions were viewed as trustworthy enough to read the works and contribute to their interpretation. Like all priesthoods and religious positions, this made membership in the college that had custody of the books highly coveted, something that is hinted at when the expansion of the college from 2 to 10 in 368, mandated that 5 of the members come from plebeian families. But despite the incredible influence these books had on the Roman polity, we must not assume that the aristocrats charged with their interpretation were deliberately engaging in sleight of hand or intentionally deceiving the masses through religion. They would have believed in the sacred nature of these texts just as fervently as the typical Roman, and felt it was their duty to honor the gods appropriately by accurately interpreting the verses. The fact that the proclamations could end up being so self-serving is more reflective of the aristocratic blinders they wore and the limits of their conceptual worldview than any attempt to willingly deceive. Like all aspects of Roman religion, the political dimensions seem to us as contrived to benefit the oligarchs, and thus an elaborate ruse. But they simply took the shape that they needed to in order to maintain aristocratic dominance, and this is not indicative of a lack of belief by participants at any layer of Roman society. The books would continue to guide Roman religious practice during times of crisis or when an unexplained prodigy required explanation, until they were destroyed in the fire that consumed the temple of Jupiter Capitolinus when Sulla captured Rome from Marian forces in 82. The loss of the city's most prominent temple, and the holy books housed therein, seemed symbolic of the new era of instability and uncertainty that accompanied Sulla's bloody reign of terror. To reassure the people of Rome, the sayings of the Cumaean Sibyl were collected from towns across Italy and recodified. The great work associated with this task and deciding which verses were legitimate probably helps account for why Sulla expanded the college which oversaw the books from 10 to 15. But in the era after their loss, the reconstituted books seem to have lost some of the authority of the originals. For example, a Sibylline prophecy was supposedly uncovered on the verge of Caesar's campaign against Parthia, stating that only a king could defeat the Parthians. Was this legitimate, or a fabrication by Caesar to support his coronation? Was it even maybe produced by his foes to make it appear that Caesar was emulating a monarch? Given the loss of the material, we can't know. Upon taking power, Augustus would seek to prevent any words of the Sibyl being used against him, and he collected whatever prophetic writings of Greek or Latin origin were in circulation anonymously or under the names of authors of little repute, and burned more than 2,000 of them, retaining only the Sibylline Books, and making a choice even among these. And he deposited them in 2 gilded cases under the pedestal of the Palatine Apollo. The ancient historians present this destruction of religious literature, and the fact that he placed the material in the temple most closely associated with his regime, as an effort to codify the verses. But given the absolutism of Augustus and his censorship of critical speech, I suspect he was also motivated by a desire to remove any pretext for opposition to his new position or the return to religious tradition he had planned. The destruction of verses that did not suit the Principate continued under his successor Tiberius. They were furthermore disturbed not a little by an oracle, reputed to be an utterance of the Sibyl, which, although it did not fit this period of the city's history at all, was nevertheless applied to the situation then existing. It ran, "When thrice 300 revolving years have run their course, civil strife upon Rome destruction shall bring, and the folly too of Sybaris." Tiberius now denounced these verses as spurious, and made an investigation of all the books that contained any prophecies, rejecting some as worthless, and retaining others as genuine. The great lengths to which the emperors went to purge the books of all material which they did not agree underscores the power of the Sibyl in shaping Roman religion, behavior, and attitudes. What remained of the books would finally be destroyed by the warlord Stilicho in 405. decades after the conversion of the imperial house, and at a point when the empire was overwhelmingly Christian. But Stilicho did not destroy these pagan verses out of a desire to censor heretical material, but rather because the books were being used to paint him as a doomed interloper. It seems that despite their conversion, the Romans still had some reverence for the ancient texts. Because of this loss, we possess only fragments and whispers of the powerful verses that shaped Roman religion for over a millennium, and we are left to wonder at what could have been written within the lost heart of Roman religion.